100.
Straight down the river.
50, 40, 30, 20, retard, 9.
Good afternoon to you. Today I'm very excited to be talking with an internationally celebrated comedian, John Vlismas. John has excelled in comedy for 25 years and he's been welcomed back year after year to places such as London, Montreal, Berlin, Melbourne, Dubai and Dublin. He is currently a content producer and lecturer at the Henley Business School, and I'd love to attend one of his classes too. But please stay with me. My name is Alex MacPhail and this is High Performance Teams. John, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me. I'm good, you know. I continue to enjoy this new reality we're in.
New reality indeed. Well, talking about new reality, I started the show in the summer. It was a 3-week plan for lockdown, and now I find myself in the coldest day of the year, still sitting in a shirt wondering what is my new reality for the winter program. But you've also been very busy online. I know you've been trying new things and getting involved and creating stuff, and a lot of your stuff can be done online too. But let's rewind a little bit and just go back. I want to just set the scene for a couple of minutes about your sort of childhood and formative years. Born in Zimbabwe, but came to South Africa fairly young.
Yeah, I think it was a career move. Not a lot of comedy going on at that time in Zim. Yeah, my mum is South African. My dad was Zimbabwean. So we came to join her family here. Lived in Durban, actually. We moved straight from Harare to Durban. And then I grew up mostly in Durban for most of my childhood. And then I was a pretty uncelebrated scholar. At the end of my high school career, they suggested I leave the high school a little bit early. I felt it was I took the deal because I felt it was their school, so I should leave. And then I did matric in sort of a college-y type place, and then studied acting, all in Durban.
Okay, well, just in the tail type of thing, you know, that was quite a popular thing around sort of early 90s, being sort of finishing school, maybe 9 and 10 in one. I remember Damlin, a lot of people I knew also kind of accelerated their last while at the end. But okay, so what was the drive? Was there a time in school where you found yourself being creative as well, and you got into it, or did this sort of kick in after leaving school early, as you put it?
No, I think it was at school. I come from parents who were not averse to creativity. That my dad wrote very well. He's a very good writer. My mum grew up in a family of people who had no money, so they had very different jobs. Her father was at certain times a miner, a panel beater, a wrestler, a comedian. Actually, sometimes whatever worked, you know. So they weren't scared of creativity. They incorporated that into our family life. So that was, I think, a big thing. And then when my dad finally sat me down and said, like, you know, you're really doing badly at school. You started off really well, and it's really not going well. What do you want to do? You know, took quite a lot of courage to admit to him that I wanted to be a comedian, and I was blown away when I told him that he basically backed me. He said, well, then you've got to be really good because it's really hard. I did not expect that answer from a dad in those days. So then I started to pursue that, and then suddenly I realized when I went to study at a Technicon. It was the only place that would have me, that I was working 18-hour days and loving it.
Yeah, so just sort of getting into the grind. Now, you mentioned a lot of things there, which was the idea of the conversation today. So working really hard. You know, celebrating your career a little bit here. So 25 years is a long career, but it all starts with the working hard in the beginning. But it doesn't feel like hard work when you're getting through 18-hour days and you're able to concentrate and see the sort of the growth and the change. Was it while you were studying drama that you started getting up on the stage and doing stand-up?
Yeah, so I think I wanted to be an actor. That was my idea because it was a much more formed thing at that time. But the truth is I'd actually seen, and I suppose it's controversial, but my dad got me a Bill Cosby tape when I was young. And because he didn't swear and he was clean and he was, this was the idea my dad had, is like really funny people don't have to be rude. Well, we now know that Bill Cosby wasn't swearing, but he was doing much worse things.
Sure.
So I started gravitating toward it. I became very excited about watching Peter Dirk Ace, actually, from quite young. This kind of crazy man putting on noses and ears and stuff on videos and getting into trouble with the government. So I loved that idea. And so I gravitated towards comedy. And then towards the end of my acting studying, I realized how little work there was in Durban for actors. And so I started looking at stand-up comedy. And it was literally, there was no industry. We had to start building it from scratch.
Oh, well, you are one of those names that just keeps getting repeated in the sort of the top echelons of comedy in South Africa. But now just to spend a few more minutes on the sort of preparation and the studying, the drama, the sort of formative years of it. So how much of your drama training carried through to your sort of online, on-stage stand-up performance? Obviously, the work ethic kicked in there for you, but how much of the actual work, the 3 years, I imagine 3 years doing drama?
Yeah, I was 3 years and I did a lot of practical work. So in a way, I'm really grateful that none of the universities would have me. And so I went to a place which focused a lot on practical performance. So I would say that we were probably graduating with, 3 or 4 times the amount of stage time of, let's say, someone with a BA. So that was very good. I think there are things that there's a lot of theory about, and behind me, there's probably books about this, but they talk about actors' intelligence, actors' awareness. There's a lot of aerials, let's say, that you may use in the course of acting, which I think were very useful when I realized what I really wanted to do was just specialize a little bit and go into stand-up. There's an immediacy to stand-up, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, but it's a very live environment. There's no script, there's no rehearsal, it's just you and the audience and the mic. And for me, that's a very pure form of expression. So I gravitated towards that.
Okay, so if I just understand what you've been saying there, your 3 years there's lots of practical hands-on and on stage and performing. Now, would you take that as when you go down to the stage, you're not worried so much about your stage show and you can focus on the actual content? Does that kind of free up your thinking, or was there not enough that sort of carried over from that?
Yeah, I think that I haven't thought about it like that, but I think it's a really good point, actually. When you do stand-up, or when you train as an actor, there's quite a lot of other stuff you have to worry about. There's quite a lot of structure. And then you gravitate towards a more free version of that. So it's more in your head than, let's say, the structure, the other people on stage, because, often when you act, you're in a cast, so it's an ensemble thing. There's a group dynamic. Sure. This is a much more personal situation, and you develop a much deeper bond with the audience. So your instincts have to be kind of maybe a little more on point, and self-knowledge has to be but I would imagine there's something very real about being a pilot, and although your job involves many hundreds of lives at once, mine doesn't. It's not that dramatic. There must be a degree of self-knowledge that you have to have as a commercial pilot, certainly as a commercial pilot. You've got to know yourself, and for me, it's always been about understanding that paradox of art. People always say you must know other people to be a comic, and I don't agree. I think you need a high level of self-awareness because ultimately we are pretty much the same. Yeah,
okay. Well, look, you're diving into some deep topics there, which I want to get to. So if I just sort of slow down a little bit and say, okay, you get it. You've done your formative training in drama, and that, and the way I assume it to have gone is that you've got this bedrock knowledge of being on stage. Now you start going specific into stand-up, and you say stand-up is live and there's no rehearsing. But talk about the preparation. When we talk about high-performance teams building on incremental gains, and certainly even though somebody sees one person on stage, one microphone, you're still a team. And this high-performance team building on preparation, executing well, and reviewing. So what is the preparation phase for a stand-up comic? How long does it last? What do you do? How do you get ready for tomorrow's show?
Right. So I think the very bedrock was to discover great teachers. I found two teachers that changed my life when I was studying at the Technikon. I think it would be wrong to not acknowledge them as a foundation for that team. I think great teachers are hugely undervalued. So that was the first thing. I found two teachers that I really related to. Out of the many that I've met in my life, those two still stick with me today. In terms of the specialization in comedy, you kind of go back to almost a base level again, because it's a new thing. You've got to develop a thick skin. I think that's the first thing, is while you've got to be sensitive to the reaction of the audience and your own stuff, you've got to develop a thick skin, because if you can't handle rejection, you really shouldn't try and get into comedy, because you take a ton of rejection up front. I haven't met anyone who just cracked it and never looked back. There's a lot of rejection, so you've got to develop quite a tough exterior while being sensitive.
Sure. Now, is the bigger rejection in the minute under the lights, or reading the review on Monday morning?
Well, that's the beauty of being a comedian. You don't have to wait for the review. You're getting the review every 20 seconds in real time, and you got to finish Hamlet after 4.5 hours to find out what the audience thought.
Yeah.
In this instance, they will just stand up and tell you, throw something, yell a comment, they'll walk out, they'll start talking. There are lots of ways human beings can reject you when you're a comic. And I've experienced all of them.
Okay, so you started getting into this, and you're building your creativity on the specialized field of stand-up comedians. And certainly the industry isn't very big. If we're zooming back to those years, it's a little bigger today, but it's very small. So how do you find role models in that time? I mean, you got great teachers from the Technikon Foundation, but how do you find role models in the specific venture that you're diving into? I mean, did you have thoughts of going to London or Broadway or New York City, or was it just in the moment, let's just be on stage in Durban?
Yeah, so I mean, every kid dreams of cracking it in the world. So obviously, I mean, I had those kind of visions. I moved from, let's say, Bill Cosby, and my dad fed me a diet of sort of other people. But in the background, I was watching Peter Dirk Ace a lot. Peter Dirk Ace became a big inspiration for me. And then I discovered at about the age of probably 16, I was taken by a friend to watch a show by a comedian called Mark Banks. And Mark Banks made a massive impact on my life. And so, if I'm really honest, I think sitting in his show in Durban in the, I think it was called the Cellar. I think it was called the Cellar or the Studio. I was watching a man on stage, and I was like, I want to do what he does. And so I sought out Mark Banks. I actually I used to stalk Mark Banks from show to show and try and meet him, and it was very hard. Couldn't meet him. Finally did, and I'm glad to say that today we've become very good friends. But he remains one of my absolute. I think Mark's one of the funniest minds I've ever been able to get close to. And I've got to meet Peter as well. He is genuinely one of the most important artists in South Africa. Peter's life work has been to help and improve things by using dangerous satire. And for me, there can't be a better combination. So I found my new teachers in my heroes very close.
Okay, and was that sufficient for you? Cracking it on the big stage. The local heroes was great. You could work towards them. You're idolizing them, following them around. Just by the way, it's much easier today on LinkedIn to connect to people. I found myself reaching out to you, and there we go. We're having a conversation. I don't have to stalk you for years to try and get your attention. But do you find that those two local heroes is what kept you going and got you in, and starting the hard work?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's our reaction to our heroes that's important, not our heroes, because I'm lucky that I found two who are just open and generous and kind and amazing. But I think often we idolize people, and then later we get let down by them. So I think it's about your own reaction to your heroes. It's how you raise yourself as a consequence of being, within their influence. That's become a big reflection for me. But Mark and Peter were both, and still remain, incredible, just generous with their time, insights, and I'm still learning from them. I mean, that'll never end.
Sure. Well, the sort of thirst of knowledge just continues. It stays with you. It'll be there until your last breath. Okay, so you get to the point now. You've got these people that you're following around, and you're trying to get all the best information you can out of them. When you start, you get on stage and you do a couple of shows. When does it feel like there's enough momentum in this flywheel? I can put in enough effort, and I'm resonating with enough people that something's. What does that show where you felt, yes, I can do this?
I wish it was that tidy. I don't think it's. I think any organic process is really messy. I've got this great saying going on in my head because someone recently said to me, "Proof of life is messiness. If you don't get any on you, you're not living." And I love that idea. So it was a very messy process. It was basically sheer will. There was no like booking agency that would talk to me. There was no industry. There were very few comedians at that time. Very few venues. There were 0 comedy clubs in South Africa. And funny enough, there are 0 again right now. I think Joe Parker's is the only one still going. But so we had to start at the beginning and build a circuit and then build a management company and then build a ward. It was just a very, very hard process to basically say, not only do you not know what I'm doing here on the stage in this bar after the band, but we are going to build this industry as we walk. And that's what a few of us did.
Okay, but now, so I understand the concept that you got to kind of do everything and build this thing up from the ground up. But when is that feeling inside where you knew there was enough laughs here, or there was enough positive feeling here for me, knowing that I'm doing something and I can do this for a while? Do you remember that feeling early enough?
Yeah, it was just we were so under supported for the first 3 years that we were like constantly playing to no one. I mean, literally, I remember splitting 14 Rand between 4 of us at the door, and even in those days, it still wasn't a lot of money at all. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We couldn't buy a drink each on what we took at the door. So it wasn't even a moment where we used evidence to decide that this was the way to go. We were we were just maniacs. We just knew that we had to make it work. And there were often times when we were like, we don't know if this is ever going to work, Sure. So it was continuing despite evidence, and that is like a call of the wild. I don't know what that thing is. I suppose it's what people call a vocation. I mean, it's a calling. I imagine religious, leaders, people who are going to become priests, or maybe to a certain degree, social workers, teachers. They talk about being a calling. I would imagine it's a similar idea. I have no experience in any of those professions, but where someone just knows it's what they're supposed to do. So I felt that, and it wasn't on success. It was pretty much in spite of failure. I still felt that.
Okay, all right. So let's fast forward. You know that there's something inside you saying keep at it, and it's obviously the classic case of the struggling artist. 14 Rand at the door by 4 people. Wow. Okay, you build up a bit of momentum, you build a bit of success, and I want to fast forward then to you end up on the road and touring internationally. And we can fast forward quite a bit. And now you celebrated in London and Melbourne, in Montreal. You've been to Dubai and Berlin and all these places, winning awards internationally. Was that thrill in the beginning versus these sort of playing at the Royal Albert Hall? Is there a common theme that runs through there, or was it just nice to be recognized back home in the beginning? How does that compare, Royal Albert Hall versus when you got that first sort of recognition back home?
Yeah, I have to say the Royal Albert Hall was a very special night. I would love to say that they were similar, but they really weren't. Playing the Royal Albert Hall was just so much more than doing a big gig. It was like I thought of the headmaster who threw me out of school. I thought of like my dad supporting me, my mum supporting me. I just thought of the validation that their belief was right and fearless, and so that was very cool. I compare that with the day that I got to meet Madiba with some other comedians. We did some work on fundraising, and he insisted on meeting us, which was an incredible thing. And I know that's a sort of a cheesy. A lot of people talk about Madiba; it's like a trope, but genuinely, it was an incredible thing for me that a filthy, controversial comedian, Madiba, allowed me to not be censored and do the work that that his organization was asking for without imposing. I just thought that was amazing. So those moments are really highlights, and the Albert Hall, just walking out on the Albert Hall, it's a big deal because a lot of people who I admire don't get that chance. And I also know that it's not all skill. There is a great deal of luck that goes into getting yourself there. And I'm very careful not to be too self-congratulatory about that because, there are people, the luck has just fallen against them and they're better than me and they'll never get that chance. So I'm also very, I'm grateful for good luck as well as, getting rewarded for what I see to be hard work because that's relative. I don't come from extreme hardship. I've never have pretended that.
Okay.
So when I talk about my struggle, it's really relative to people who've done proper monumental struggles.
Sure. Okay. Well, you've talked in there on the sort of the feeling of validation, but now going into an event like the Royal Albert Hall, I mean, I think, are you still the only South African comedian who's played at the Albert Hall? Is that right?
Oh, no. So I think that's from a press release that spoke about how I was the only one to have played a whole bunch of different things in a sequence.
All right. Okay.
I played the Albert Hall with a bunch of South Africans. There were a whole lot of people. So Mark Banks was there, Trevor Noah was there, Riyad Musa was there, Louis Gola was there. Yeah, there were a whole bunch of us who played.
All right. So there was specifically to those three venues that was mentioned. Okay. But now getting ready for any of these big events, I mean, you mentioned the Royal Albert Hall. It's a highlight. How do you prepare for that? What is the day before or the week before building up? Like, tell me a little bit about your team that supports you to get there. Tell me a bit about your sort of thought processes and preparation for it, and then sort of walking out. What is the sort of that window of your in time for a professional comedian going into such a big venue?
Right. So that's a great question, actually. So most people have been raised in a very sort of sort of a Christo-Judaic kind of Calvinist work ethic. So their idea would be exhaustive preparation, because we all know that hard work gets you where you're supposed to be. That's the kind of pattern that's burned into our neural pathways. And for me, it's not about that. And the reason I say that with such confidence, because I used to think that I was goofing off before big shows by taking quiet time and doing nothing really important. Like I would just walk around and be an idiot. Like I wouldn't speak to anyone. I would just be walking around and pretty much incapable of talking, until I started teaching scuba diving and I started to understand the mentality of people when you lead them and you put them in a boat, take them out to sea, and then you look after them for a dive. There are different tasks that your brain performs, and before a big show, for me, instead of getting hyped up and over prepared, what I find is it's time to gear down. It's time to record. So go for a walk and just record. Let the world wash over you. Don't panic. Don't burn energy before you walk on stage. Turn the nerves that you're feeling into excitement, which is hyper awareness as opposed to something debilitating. Become extra sort of sensitive. But the way to do it is to not psych yourself up. It's to calm yourself down and still yourself. I found that as I get older, and I hope I got better as a comic before I ended, but I found that getting calm before a show was everything. It was when I was young, I used to drink like 3 Red Bulls, jump up and down, get excited, and it's just not the way to be. You know, when you watch a great old artist like a musician playing, they genuinely enjoy holding their guitar. They genuinely enjoy. They're not that interested in the audience because they know that if they interact with that guitar the way they want to, everybody's going to have a good time.
Sure.
You know, it's not about impressing anyone.
Yeah.
So for me, it's about getting the mic and remembering that it's just you and the mic and the audience, and you just want to bring those people into a world. So you got to get calm, not load yourself emotionally, forget about the noise, and just enjoy that kind of. It's like sort of a state of grace, almost, I suppose.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier, then you don't want to over prepare. You want to record. You mean sort of take in what's going on around you.
Yeah.
Imagine like Royal Albert Hall. You're walking around Hyde Park and just noticing what's going on in the city and the trees and the people. And that sounds, I mean, it's a very common theme amongst people going into high performance in an event. You take that time to just sort of almost the way people talk about it, to center yourself and just sort of free up all the noise to focus on the opportunity right in front of you. So what is that? Yeah. So you've mentioned so that the guitarist or the musician who gets in tune with his guitar, you get in tune with your mic. But I mean, you are aware on stage. So let's talk about the on stage now. You walk out and obviously you want to have that first 30, 60, 90 seconds to just connect. But what is that sort of thought process? What are the steps that you take? Is that mechanical? Is that rehearsed? Is that a feeling you get as you walk out? Or how does that first 2 minutes, how does that play out?
So after much analysis, I would like to say that it's a concert between different centers of yourself. So there's a mechanical like center. So there you've got kind of your material, and you trust your material, and you know that it's well written and it's crafted. Then you've got this kind of less mechanical, maybe more let's call it emergent self. So that's where you kind of function on the tightrope. It's where you engage your core, your balance. You're kind of alive to the current situation. You're watching the audience. You want to see what's the lighting, what's the stage, what do the people look like? Did someone arrive late? Is there like a problem? Is there something which disrupts the flow that you can use to kind of do something? And so always for me, I never remember that first moment on stage. Just before I walk on, I go completely blank. I can't remember what I'm going to say, and I panic. And then I step over the threshold, and I'm almost like in this kind of other state. And funny enough, I read a book. I think I might not have finished it. It's called Stealing Fire, and it's all about how, in one part, how Navy SEALs manage to go into this almost like alpha brainwave state when they're moving through a dangerous situation as a team, and they're not speaking. They just kind of. I feel like my centers go into a bit of a stealing fire mode, and it's almost like you're just letting the dance kind of take place. There's an interaction between, I do trust my material. I've done it lots of times. I have muscle memory of how this goes. I know my heart rate's going to go up. I know that my mouth might get dry. Like you start to kind of tick the boxes, and then it all seems to kind of work. And I wish I had a more sort of scientific explanation for it. But I feel like part of that calming down first is what allows that thing to happen at the right time.
Okay, and did you have a sort of a set routine as well? Is the walk around happening at lunchtime, and you go for an afternoon nap, and you sort of get dressed 3 hours before? Is there a routine there, or not really?
Yeah, there is pretty much. I think in a strange city, I walk around a lot because I love that idea of walking. I walk very far in cities, so like a lot, 20 Ks a day, just wandering around. I very, very rarely speak to people. I just keep walking, and I get lost as much as I can. I walk away from where I know I am, so I know I've got to get back. So that's a big thing. And then back to the hotel, and then literally lying around and watching really bad television, whatever's on in the hotel. I don't really talk to anyone beforehand. I don't make phone calls. I may call my daughter or someone who I need to check in on, but I keep that kind of let's call it invested communication to a minimum. I'm not that interested in breaking that kind of bubble that I've built.
Sure.
And then backstage, interestingly, with comedians, if you work with a bunch of really seasoned, talented comedians, backstage is a very quiet, calm place. If you work with younger comics, it's really boisterous and loud, and everyone's trying their material on everyone else before they go on. It's normally headphones in just like this, and just chilling, listening to some music.
Okay.
And then waiting to go on, because we always say that's what ages you is the waiting. It's not the actual performing.
Yeah, because once you get in, you're sort of this autonomous person kicks into gear, and you've done it before. You grooved. Your swing is grooved, and you're on stage and you're delivering. But I just want to back up again a little bit. So in terms of the team, so what does your team look like? What are the kind of roles that support you, particularly as it relates to a big event and the build up to this event, the last couple of days or the hours before? Who's in your team? What type of person is helping you out, celebrating for you to be on stage for that hour or so?
Yeah, so it's kind of a contentious issue with comedians because they see themselves as kind of lone gunmen, which is a bit of a glory position because, as you mentioned, there will be an agent and a manager, sometimes the same people, depending on which business model you're in. I built a company which managed me and then became an agent and manager to other people. So you need good representation. That's important because they take a lot of the sort of the energy draining stuff that might detract from the show away. So they sort of keep that admin stuff and kind of the banal, because the truth is, when you're going to sell magic, which is what comedy really is, you're selling, this idea that, there's this kind of escape. So you want to get away from the banal as much as you can, and you want to sort of cut those ties. So that's important. Although later in life, I realized that was actually quite a bad move because I lost sight of the details, which I now have firmly under control again. But and then you've got PR, which is an ongoing battle because they always think they've done too much, and you never think they've done enough. But between you, you do need someone to shape the story around you. You've got to have someone just giving you a hand with that. So I've worked with many PR people, and you don't often keep with one person in South Africa because it's an imprecise art form, so it's hard to measure what you're getting back.
Sure.
But and also I was really lucky early on because I basically worked very hard, and then I had a double hit where I got chosen to go to Canada, and then I got a TV show as I was getting ready to leave for Canada. So I got a massive publicity clap from TV when TV was still the biggest platform we had. I've worked with those guys. So you do need a team, but more importantly than that, and I don't know if anyone's spoken about this, but your partnerships in your life, your family, ultimately pay the biggest price, because it's a difficult life, and you're getting this incredible admiration in all kinds of places. And no matter what you do the night before and what a mess you leave, you literally get up in the morning and then you get treated beautifully when you land again in a whole new clean place that has no knowledge of your fault. So I'm referring mostly now to my rather messy party habits that I developed. But you develop almost like this lack of accountability, because everyone just wants you to do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And then you go home and you're back to a structure where you fit in to this family, and you play a part, and you're tired, and there's rules and there's like normal stuff, and then you've got to try and remember what it's like to be banal and change nappies and clean up the dishes and stuff. So there's a lot of strain on relationships, because as much as your partners often want you to do well and succeed, it is an unnatural thing. And ultimately why I realized that I would walk away from comedy, because that kind of reward system is not good for me as a human being. It's toxic. And so fame as an idea for me is not a good thing for my life. And so I decided I'd rather do something else. All
right.
It's a weird.
Okay, you talk a lot of things there. I just want to put this clip up that you've shared online as well, and we can get into this part as well. This is a bit more about the sort of business leadership training and some sort of insights you've shared with guests along the way. There we go. Shared world.
Yeah. I'm an unusual human being, and I've had quite an unusual history. You've decided that I'm X because your own learning and your own experience has taught you what to think when you see someone who looks like me, tattoos in very obvious places, body piercing. I don't care what you think. Because whatever you think there are things that are wrong. You definitely have things in your mind that are wrong. And it doesn't matter who told you them, they could still be wrong. And that's the beauty of being me. I've questioned everything. From the moment I fell out of a screaming mother and started running, I've questioned everything. When you go to Montreal, when you go to Berlin, when you go to Australia, how do you change your material? And when I started, I used to think that I should try and become one of them. So what I do now, and I have done for the last 5 or 6 or 7 years, is I talk as a South African going abroad, and I stay very, very firmly South African. And people say, but how does everyone connect? So that got me thinking. I performed live to about 800,000 people face to face in my life. In 7 countries and 800,000 people roughly, I have observed you for thousands and thousands of hours. Because a comic's not like an actor, or like we get a boom and we get a response immediately. If it's not working, we have to change it. We have to kind of find where you are and go with you. So having met lots and lots of people and always being asked what's the differentiator between people. Okay, that's the big thing that the journalist always asks. When you go there, how are they different? So my proposal to you is, if you truly want to understand people at the speed that a performer picks up who the crowd is, we don't try and survey the crowd. We don't do a quick sweep with our facial recognition over 2,000 people and go, okay, roughly 30% black, this many, No. All you have to do is understand yourself, because you have much more in common with every single person sitting in the room than you have different. So all the time I meet these companies, and then we talk about this.
So I love the kind of concepts that you've been sharing there, John, and this can kind of segue us a little bit into your next career. But before we get there, so you made a decision, and based on the passing of your father, and that was kind of the sort of the bookend of your career. He supported you so well in the beginning to get going with that great idea. Listen, if you're going to do it properly and be the best. And at the end, with this passing, you had that great show at the end of it all. And that was kind of celebrated as, that was a great time, but there's other things in life, and let me do other things. So you segue into sort of business leadership and getting involved with the MBA program at Henley in creativity. But just take me through for a short while about that sort of time in your life where you put these pieces together and called it quits after 25 years.
Yeah, so we fast forward, and my dad, who I was very close to, got sick. So I was actually doing my MBA at the time. He had a stroke, and my dad also had some other what they call comorbidities. So he had other complications that made his stroke more risky than, let's say, to a healthy 73-year-old, 74-year-old. So I decided to stop studying for a while, because that was the one thing I could put on pause. I have other businesses and stuff that I had to keep going. But I went to spend the last five. I mean, I didn't know we were going to be the last 5 months, but they were, and we thought he would recover. So we set up a team, and he did home recovery. We had a whole bunch of people working on with him, and he was doing quite well actually. And then he had a catastrophic cardiac event, which triggered congestive cardiac failure. So it's basically over about 3 weeks, his heart wound down, and so that was a tough time. It was hard going, but what I call my dad's last gift was clarity. And so I realized probably in the moments that my dad died, actually, like the actual physical, I was standing with him when he died. But in those moments, I realized that it's time to live another life. And perhaps what I'd been doing was cool, but it wasn't important enough. And so I also realized that we become paralyzed by patterns we become comfortable with. That's why I'm wearing blue nail polish. I'm not wearing it for anyone else's benefit. I'm trying to experiment with how awkward it makes me feel when I'm talking to other people, because that's a byproduct of other people's prejudice on my psyche. And I need to learn to master that, because it's horrible. Also makes me realize what damage you do to other people by being prejudiced against them for no real reason, because this is just some nail polish. It really doesn't change anything about me. So my dad passed, and so I had been the reason I started studying at Henley was I have a great friendship. One of my other great teachers in my life is John Foster Pedley.
Good man.
Absolutely, and John is truly the man I credit with my next move in life. We met long ago, and he made me go to Cape Town when he was lecturing at the Graduate School of Business, and he basically let me come down with no plan and talk to his MBA students. Stop reading, and I found a man who genuinely was intellectual, but also quite alternative and not judgmental, and he just made me pay attention to learning. And so we stayed friends and developed what I call an intellectual mentorship. And so John, over about 10 years, gently coaxed out this kind of need for me to really want to study. And my dad had been very supportive of me taking up the books. So I did that. And so I got into the sort of Henley, let's call it ecosystem, which is quite exciting for me, because it's a place where I think they blend quite serious business school, award-winning international blah, 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 with some pretty radical learning ideas. And then while I was studying, John said, "Hey man, don't you want to meet some of the faculty, and perhaps you want to do some teaching?" So that was exciting for me, and I started doing it before I decided to leave comedy. This was all happening in the background. And so I joined a program, and I've been on it for about 18 months. We've done a whole lot of cohorts, maybe 2 years. And in fact, that's just won a really big award overseas for a global company that rates executive education, but I'm part of a very big team. And so I was studying and teaching, and I suddenly just felt alive again in a really interesting way. And I started giving those talks like the one you saw, and all based on things John had sort of provoked me to kind of try and extrude from my own head. And so, and that's what happened. And so now actually I'm in a bit of a weird space, because I'm doing the talks, but I'm not teaching as much because we're in this lockdown, and we have faculty who need to be deployed. So I've stepped back, but in the meanwhile, I've become the head of marketing at Henley, and while we migrate to the virtual world, and it's been an incredible journey. I don't really leave this chair much. I sleep very little, and I'm a virtual production company as well. But I'm also, as you showed, I do these talks about, for example, my nail experiment. I do a lot of talks for companies about how to reframe and learn, think in new ways. But increasingly, I go back to what we are as a creature, and a lot of it's based on my understanding of people for the last 25 years, and trying to,
So how are you feeling? Are you feeling comfortable with your nails today? You said it was an experiment for you.
Yeah, I'm super comfortable. I am. I did this for 100 mining executives the other day, and that's where I've just kept them, because it was really interesting.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And listen, there's some people bringing in some comments here, and you mentioned in the beginning the sort of the satire and the political stances, and I know your view of comedy as well is there's got to be a real message behind it. We're not just going to share a laugh because someone else got a laugh out of it. So the people resonate with that too, that, let's have a proper message, and the satire and the sort of political and racism. You had that show about, I'm going to put that picture up, the good racist. There's a clip of you on stage there. But now, if you look at where we're going now today, with all your online work, etc. now, and okay, right now it's COVID. Do you think that YouTube has changed the game for people like stand-up comedians, etc.? I know people have put a lot of their work out there online now too, and in segments it's free, it's all available. Are people not going to live shows, ignoring COVID? Are people not going to live shows, or is it celebrating the live shows?
Well, we did see a collapse in numbers pre-COVID. I still keep an eye on what's going on in the comedy world. I've got a production company that's doing quite a lot of virtual comedy production at the moment. There was a decline, and I think people were bored. I think you can't ignore a basic like laws of the world, and one of them is booms and busts. That's a natural cycle. There was a big hype in comedy for quite a long time. And then it bust, and there are other options. I think with regards to YouTube and stuff, I think COVID has nudged people to start thinking beyond standing on a stage and performing live to people, whether it's delivery platforms, whether it's formats, whether it's payment models, those who, and it's always pyramids. There'll be a few early adopters who'll crack it, and there'll be a few sort of, middle of the pyramid people who'll do it, and then everyone will try and go ahead, and what they'll do is they flood the market, and it's happening right now with substandard content. So that will drive the value of online content down. It'll cause a general boredom. People will move away, and then they'll come back later when the really good practitioners are still around and they improve. So I think it's been a very interesting time, and I know that there's going to be a great deal of suffering and loss, and there will be lives lost with COVID and all of that stuff, and probably unfairly skewed towards the people who've already had a really tough time in life. But I also am honest enough to say those of us who have excess or surplus or privilege, if we don't use this time to pivot as much as possible, well, then we get the kind of disruption that we deserve. I just think it's lazy to sit back. I still talk about my uncle's idea to turn his garage into a B&B for the World Cup. These no hope, dumb ideas. Oh, just...
Oh yeah. Well, John, to just backtrack again a few minutes. So your transition into the business school, certainly with my dealings with John Foster Pedley, also a great guy, and I can see how you can inspire you. He's inspired me in other ways too. You're getting in there, and in some ways, this is just a personal one for me now. You've gone from your sort of life, studying drama, life on the stage, building this massive career, and sort of pivoted into being, a teacher, a lecturer, a content creator at a prestigious, internationally recognized business school. I've come on the opposite journey, where I've sort of built as the operator and got into training, and I've been, doing classroom training for many, many years as well. And I've always been using that as a bit of a stage for me to sort of experiment with what would it be like one day to be on Broadway or on TV or whatever. And now I find myself into this disrupted model of COVID. There's no flying going on. How can I stay relevant with my keynote speaking, etc.? And now I find myself on the other side. You've journeyed off the stage into the classroom. I've gone from the classroom onto the stage. Any thoughts on the sort of the tips and tricks that you're bringing into the classroom? I mean, is it a humorous class? I mean, people see John Vlismas as the lecturer. I would go in there thinking this is going to be great.
Yeah, no, look, I certainly try and make it entertaining. I think I'm getting my own back on all the boring teachers I had to sit through. I love the classroom to be simultaneously quite fun, pretty provocative. I love the idea of dissonance. That's my area of teaching. I like to create dissonance in a group because it's a form of raised energy, and it's heightened awareness, even though it might be sort of emotionally generated. But once you have that raised energy, once you bring it up out of people, you've got to quickly work with it, get it into something, show them an insight, get to the enlightening moment, bang, and then put them back and go, it's all going to be okay, you're safe. So I love the classroom. It's amazing. I'm getting my head around teaching via this platform, not this particular platform, but there's some others we use. And I'm finding it really interesting. For example, on Zoom, what I've discovered is you can really stare at people while they're talking, and they have no idea that you're studying their face for incredible visual cues. And because obviously on Zoom meetings, you've got your camera, but they don't know what screen you're looking at, and you can pin and bring up someone's face really, really close. and it gives you an incredible sense of where they are on the learning journey. So that's been an incredible thing for me in this space, because a lot of people say, oh, it's not the same, it's not live. No, but it could be hyper live. It is actually live. First of all, we're still interacting live.
Sure.
And this particular execution is actually live on air. So it's hyper live.
Yeah.
Except I can actually pin and do stuff like you're sharing screens and content. This is much better than in some ways, being in a classroom.
Oh yeah, there's definitely some benefits to it. But now, is that a skill that you learned on stage? Is that something that stand-up comedians do? You go on stage and you scan quickly to see the awkward shuffle or whatever's happening in the audience? Is that an active part of the job of a stand-up comedian?
Yeah, I think you've got to learn to read people. I think it's important. Everyone's got the software, but we just don't use it. So and what I've learned is that it's early learned prejudice that switches off your reasoning, your high functioning way of doing things. That's why people think I'm a weirdo. I've got tattoos, and I'm like mad. I'm not your average dude. Not everyone is happy that I'm in the supermarket, but at the same time, I have an ability because I've lived. I've really lived, right? I'm not proud of everything, but I'm honest about it. So my level of judgment of other human beings is really low. I don't judge people. I'm really open to what other people have got to say and think. You'll find me, if you read my Google search history, you probably want to have me arrested. You'll find me on right-wing hate sites, and you'll find me in all kinds of deeply religious things. I just want to know. I want to know. I don't want to judge anyone. I just want to know what it is that you think or you believe or how do you express yourself.
Yeah.
So I found that as I learned to suspend judgment, those things you talk about, like reading people, it just happens faster. It's more conceptual and it's abstract, but it's really rich, as opposed to step 1, look at them. Step 2, what is the body language? Step 3, how far are their feet apart? You just don't have time to do that in a live environment, which I imagine must be like a pilot. Surely because you have to react really quickly, right? You've got times when you don't really have time to think. You've got to just do what you do. And then if you examine, how did I get to that decision?
Sure.
I don't know how you find that.
Well, I can relate to one small aspect I think I shared with a previous guest too, is that if you're sitting flying an aeroplane and things are in sync, I imagine there's days when you're on stage or in the classroom and today's a good day. You can feel it within the first 2 minutes. You're feeling loose. You're feeling like things are coming to you. And it's the same in flying. You're in the cockpit. You're flying this Airbus 340 and you're coming into land. There's very accurate, sophisticated instruments in front of you. But you can also tell sometimes by just a feeling, by the senses, this heightened sense of awareness, you can tell that there's about to be a change in the rate of descent. It's going to just increase slightly. And before before it actually takes into effect, you sort of make a reaction, and obviously a big airplane, the reaction takes time to kick in, and a moment later you see this drop in the vertical speed indicator. So you get that sort of at one with the aircraft feeling, or on stage at one with your audience, and that's the other thing I wanted to bring up. So what are you feeling when you're working in a team? So let's take it off the stage now, and now you're working with your creative team at Henley. What do you notice and feel within yourself, or the communication or the interaction with your teammates when you are on something and you're firing on all cylinders? What are those feelings that stand out for you?
It's a great question. I think if I just think about a meeting we had this morning about a campaign, there's a sense, kind of what you're describing, that if you're in an empathetic mode and you are feeling each other, in the kind of, as the idea gets born, if everybody's on the bus, everybody's with you, there's this incredible sense of flow and acceptance of other people's ideas, and the ideas seem to link into each other beautifully, as opposed to those days where everything's a little bit adversarial. You're not getting it, or like, I just can't see what you mean, or like your language almost seems to fit in. You develop a code, somebody uses a word that describes a feeling perfectly, so now everyone's on board with that word. So my best feeling is when I don't go in with an agenda, and we literally emerge. We allow the idea to emerge in the meeting rather than going and imposing an idea on the team. But having said that, I've got to just qualify it, because often the way to get to a really good idea is to put severe constraint on the situation.
Sure.
So not what I want out of it, but here are the limits. We've got very serious limits. It's budget, time, politics. So as you put deeper constraints on a situation, it seems like the quality of the creativity that comes out is better.
Nice. There's a nice theme that it's come up before as well. This constraining the creativity. The more creative you are, almost the tighter constraints you need to be able to then produce the work that you want to. So just staying on that team at Henley, the creative, content producing team, the marketing team, the lecturing team. You can pick anyone, or they might all be the same people. Are you working together? How do you guys then go about this principle of incremental gains? How do you review? On stage, it's easy to review. That one didn't work. Scrap it for next time. But now it might be a week, a month, a term, a year, or the review at the end of the year. How do you review what you've done as a team?
So that is quite a good question, especially in marketing, because obviously marketing isn't always easy to quantify in the short term and very precisely. Not the same as sales. You put in this much you spend this much on sales, you get this much back. This is the change. So it is a bit more complicated. You've got to have belief in the team. You've got to make sure you've got the people around you that you can leave for a while and you won't be able to measure them, but you're confident that by the end of the period, we will have done something good. So that's quite an interesting one. We're trying to invent new metrics, and that's been quite interesting because it leaves the realm of what we call hard metrics and you're into soft metrics. You've got to be careful because politeness, diplomacy, getting along is not a measure of success. That can also be a measure of extreme mediocrity. So you've got to keep throwing energy into the system, and people often look for balance. And back to my talk about dissonance, I don't believe that balance is where the great work is done. I believe it's an imbalance. So that's why, for example, I teach in one of my courses that it doesn't matter what you think of him, but Julius Malema is a very important ingredient in our political system. You have to be grateful that we have him, because it doesn't matter what you think about his personal approach or opinions or policy, but on a macro scale, he's the sort of irritant that keeps people on their toes, that keeps them busy. It gets we talk about him causing chaos in Parliament. Yeah, okay, but you were upset when they were sleeping. Now they're jumping up and down. That's actually progress.
You've got change.
Well, the truth is, you don't like what he says about your future, so that's why you're going to judge everything he does.
Yeah.
But if you are a leader, you've got to look in the system and go, okay, so we have the Julius. Let's put him there. Let's support him, contain him, but let's respect the energy he brings into the system. Then he might excite the people who are kind of gifted but really low energy. Let's raise their energy. And if it means getting them angry, well, then let's do that. But once they're angry, it's my job, when their energy is raised, I must now redirect that energy. And we don't often take leadership in that kind of, we don't take leadership on in that we are taught that by being leaders, we have more power, therefore we have more authority, therefore we are right. Yeah. It's a very dangerous path.
That's an interesting concept that you bring up, and I'm obviously out there in the academic domain too. But as you were speaking, it was sort of a penny drop for me. Like we have a lot of this energy in the country, but it isn't often repurposed for something useful. The energy definitely it's there. You've got a whole bit about the rage, and it just takes 20 seconds for a taxi driver to ruin your week. Repurpose that energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And be loose, be very loose. That's why I talk about suspending judgment. I understand how biases form. Most of us don't understand why we have biases. They don't come from where we think they come from. Essentially we inherit them from the past where there was less information. And yet we're taught to worship tradition. Tradition is ignorance. Those were excuses for things that happened that we couldn't explain because we didn't have the science. So we are basically basing our richest a knowledge base on old knowledge, and that's not right. Your cell phone doesn't go, "Oh, I'm upgrading back to 83," because that's tradition. It goes to like tomorrow. Yeah. So I think it's kind of important. And to your point, we have a lot of misplaced energy in South Africa. I've never thought of it like that, and I love how you put it because it's given me an idea. That's what I really am trying to do with my work, is to reposition the energy that's available.
Okay, John, look, it's been a great conversation. I think we could have an episode 2, 3, and 4 coming forward, but I want to leave you with one more question, please. So what you've touched on it throughout the chat as well, but what is your top tips for creating a high-performance team?
So empathy is very important. In diving, we have a golden rule, and I tell that to everyone who's going to start a team, equalize early and often.
Yes.
Keep bringing yourself back to ground level. Don't float above your team. And if you leave it too long, just like when you're going underwater and you don't equalize early and often, the pressure differential is too great to correct without damaging yourself. So that's a really good metaphor for it. So equalize early and often. You've got to have equal amounts of reverence and disrespect. In other words, you should weight everything equally, including yourself. But you also must learn to disregard the nonsense. There's so much, and fake news is not new. It's been around forever. The idea that, let's say, gay people are evil, or that black people are this, or that Jewish people are that, or, whatever, transgender people are this. This is all fake news that goes into your brain, and it's reported as real news. And it affects your ability to lead a team because it puts these barriers between people. So try and eliminate those barriers by being brave enough to disregard bad information. And the way you find bad information is be your own journalist. Find 3 independent, credible sources and corroborate the story. We don't have the energy to do that. We just want to believe Twitter, and you're filling your head with junk. So try and get to the best approximation of the truth that you can, and it will never be the absolute truth.
Sure.
Because the truth is a fluid arrangement between apes. It's called the intersubjective entity, and it only exists as long as we all agree that it does.
I'm curious now, before I said it was last question, but you talk about scuba diving. So when did the scuba diving come in? Was this once you're already a comedian or before?
Before. I did it several times, and I failed several times. But then when I came out of rehab, essentially, I changed my entire body chemistry. So I was severely anxiety-ridden all the time. So what better way to treat anxiety than lead a group of strangers underwater out to sea, where you're not allowed to be anxious. So I did that. And then I got into technical diving because I'm a bit obsessive. But when I got down deep and I realized there was nothing for me there except a huge possibility of dying, I stopped that immediately. So I haven't actually dived for quite a long time, but I found it to be the closest thing I've ever found to a sort of a spiritual framework, because it's a deeply, it's a place of deep respect for me. It's beautiful. It's still, I'm weightless, and there's controls. I've got to be careful. I've got to be educated. I've got to be aware of myself. And people trust you underwater. They give you their life in their hands.
Sure.
So for me, it became a very, very spiritual a journey, diving. And so becoming an instructor was a very important part of my journey. Yeah.
Well, I love that concept, equalize early and often. And the way you've described it there, I think you should come flying with me one day and we can talk about this weightless flying around and a beautiful, quiet, calming place too. John, thank you so thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful chatting with you, and all the best with the online lectures. We'll hopefully catch up for episode 2.
Thanks, man. Thanks, Alex.
Folks, it's been a wonderful chat with John. Creativity and all things that go with it. I enjoyed the conversation. I hope you did too. Please remember to subscribe and share and put your comments down below if you've got some questions and if you're not watching it live now. Thank you once again. Until the next time, stay safe.